They thought they understood you. Not deeply, not truly, but enough to feel comfortable misjudging you. They watched you long enough to build a theory. A dangerous one. They saw your patience, your restraint. That you stood down, that you stayed calm when others would have reacted. They saw how you helped without keeping score, how you listened without interrupting, how you forgave without demanding apologies. And in their mind, they connected the wrong dots. They decided you were harmless. They decided your kindness came from necessity, not choice. That your gentleness existed because you couldn't be anything else. They believed you needed harmony more than respect, connection more than dignity, peace more than truth, and that belief gave them confidence. Confidence to push, confidence to test people, confidence to take liberties they would never take with someone they respected. They didn't wake up one day and decide to disrespect you. It happened slowly. Small comments, subtle dismissals, tiny boundary violations disguised as jokes, stress, honesty, or just how they are. They watched closely after each one, waiting for you to snap, waiting for you to prove them wrong. But you didn't. You stayed calm, you stayed measured, you stayed kind. And that sealed the calculation in their mind. Oh, they won't do anything. That's when the real disrespect began, because when people believe there are no consequences, behavior deteriorates fast. They spoke to you in tones they'd never use with someone they feared losing. They took from you without giving back. They expected access without accountability. And the most dangerous part, they felt entitled to you, your time, your energy, your understanding. They assumed your kindness was permanent. They didn't know it was conditional. Not because you're cruel, but because you're conscious. You see things most people miss. You notice patterns. You feel shifts in energy. You register when something stops being mutual and starts becoming exploitative. And while they thought you were putting up with it, you were actually observing, not collecting ammo, not planning revenge. Just watch standing. You weren't silent because you were powerless. You were silent because you were deciding. There's a difference people don't understand until it's too late. Silence from fear feels weak. Silence from control feels heavy. And yours was the second kind. Then came the moment. Not dramatic, not explosive. Just clear. Something they said. Something they did. Something small enough that they didn't even notice it mattered. But you did, because it crossed a line that only exists when someone values themselves. The line where continuing to be kind would mean betraying your own dignity. And in that moment, something shifted, not outwardly. Inwardly, your tone didn't rise. Your face didn't change much. You didn't lecture or threaten. You just looked at them. Really looked. And for the first time, they didn't see warmth. They saw awareness. They saw presence. They saw someone who suddenly wasn't emotionally available anymore. That's when their body reacted before their mind did. A tightening in the chest. A subtle unease. A feeling they couldn't explain. Because instinct recognized what ego couldn't. They had crossed someone who was choosing restraint. And restraint, once withdrawn, reveals power. You didn't announce the shift. You didn't need to. It showed up in the smallest ways. Shorter responses, clearer boundaries, less tolerance for nonsense. You stopped explaining yourself. Stopped justifying your standards. Stopped absorbing energy that wasn't being returned. Pull. And they felt the distance immediately. That's when confusion set in. What changed? Why do they feel different? Why doesn't my usual behavior work anymore? They tried to poke again. A joke, comment, a test, and it didn't land. Not because you reacted, but because you didn't. Your energy didn't move, and that scared them. Because anger they understand, yelling they can frame, drama they can manipulate. But calm withdrawal, that's terrifying, because calm withdrawal means decision. You had decided something about them, and they could feel it. This is where they realized something fundamental. You weren't being kind because you had to be. You were being kind because you chose to be. And choice can be revoked. They had mistaken gentleness for weakness. What they didn't understand is that gentleness is often strength under control. You are what psychologists call an anomaly, a contradiction to simplistic models of human behavior. Most people fit predictable roles, weak and kind, strong and aggressive, but you don't. You are kind and capable, compassionate and dangerous. And that combination breaks people's mental framework because they don't know how to categorize you. You don't threaten. You don't posture. You don't seek dominance. Yet something about you signals, don't push. That signal became undeniable the moment your kindness disappeared, not replaced by cruelty, replaced by neutrality, and neutrality from someone who used to care feels like loss. That's when they started replaying every interaction, every joke, every comment. Bull. Every moment they took you for granted. They're scanning for the exact second everything changed. Most of them can't find it because you don't explode, you conclude, and conclusions are silent. Here's the part they never expected. You know exactly how to hurt people, not physically, psychologically. You understand motivations, insecurities, fears, because you listen, because you pay attention, because people tell you who they are when they feel safe, and you made them feel safe. They confessed things, shared vulnerabilities, showed you their real face. People not realizing they were handing you a map you never intended to use. But they know you have it. On some instinctive level, they know. They know you could dismantle them if you wanted to. Expose them, break them emotionally, outmaneuver them socially. And the fact that you don't, that's what makes you dangerous. Power restrained is more intimidating than power unleashed. That's the paradox they can't resolve. They're used to two types of people. People who are kind because they're afraid. People who are cruel because they're strong. You are neither. You are strong enough to be kind, and that unsettles them. People. Because it means their behavior didn't go unnoticed. It was tolerated. And tolerance has limits. Now they're entering the first psychological phase. Denial. They're not really like that. They'll go back to normal. They're just having a phase. They tell themselves this because the alternative is uncomfortable. The alternative is admitting they misjudged you, that they disrespected someone who didn't need them, that they crossed someone who could walk away without collapsing. So they wait. They expect you to soften, to reach out, to explain, to restore balance, but you don't. Because once you see someone clearly, you don't unsee it. And kindness without clarity is self. Betrayal days pass. The distance stays. And denial cracks. Now they move into bargaining. They test apologies, not real ones, soft ones. Half acknowledgments wrapped in excuses. I didn't mean it like that. You're too sensitive. You know how I am. They're trying to reset the relationship without changing themselves. Trying to regain access without accountability. And that's when it hits them. You're not negotiating. You're not angry. That's the moment fear enters. Not fear of violence. Fear of irrelevance. Because they're realizing something devastating. You don't need them. You wanted them once. But need. No. And people can handle being disliked. What they can't handle is being unnecessary. That realization destabilizes them. Because your absence exposes something they don't want to face. They benefited from you more than you benefited from them. Your patience, your support, your understanding. You were an asset, and they treated you like an object. Now comes the part that keeps them awake. They can't make you the villain. You didn't attack. You didn't gossip. You didn't explode. You simply removed yourself. And removal without explanation forces self-reflection or self-deception. Most choose deception. They start telling stories, rewriting history, painting you as cold, arrogant, distant. But the narrative doesn't stick, because your reputation precedes you. People know your character. They know you don't cut people off lightly. So when someone says, they just disappeared, the unspoken question is, what did you do? You don't defend yourself. You don't need to. Silence does the work. This is where part one pauses. Because what comes next is the most uncomfortable phase for them. The phase where realization becomes permanent. The phase where they understand not just what they lost, but who you really are. This is the phase they never talk about. The phase that doesn't show up in arguments, texts, or confrontations. It happens alone, late at night, in silence. This is when denial dies, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. They stop telling themselves you'll come back. They stop expecting a message. They stop rehearsing explanations. And the truth settles in. You didn't leave to teach them a lesson. You left because you were finished. That realization lands heavy because it removes hope. And hope is what keeps people comfortable with their mistakes. Without hope, they're forced to sit with reality. The reality that they misjudged you, not just a little, completely. They didn't understand your kindness. They didn't understand your patience. These civilized people, they didn't understand your silence. They thought they were dealing with someone passive. What they were actually dealing with was someone disciplined. There's a difference most people never learn. Passive people endure because they don't believe they deserve better. These disciplined people endure because they're evaluating whether something is worth their energy. You were never stuck, you were deciding. And now that decision has been made. This is where realization turns permanent, because they start noticing patterns they ignored before. They notice how you're still calm, still grounded, still moving forward. People, without them no collapse, no spiral, no public breakdown. You didn't need closure. You didn't need validation. You didn't need to win. You just moved on. People, and that does something devastating to people who underestimated you, because it confirms their worst fear. You weren't attached to them. You were generous with them. There's a massive difference. Attachment begs. Generosity withdraws. And generosity, once withdrawn, doesn't announce itself. It simply disappears. This is where they begin replaying memories differently. Moments that once felt ordinary now feel significant. People. They remember how often you gave them the benefit of the doubt, how often you smoothed things over, how often you protected the relationship from conflict. They realize you were carrying the emotional weight alone. And instead of appreciating it, they exploited it. That's when regret shows up. Not the shallow kind. Not sorry if I hurt you. But the deep internal kind. Kind that comes from recognizing you had access to something rare. A person who was strong enough to protect you, and kind enough to want to. That combination is uncommon. And they destroyed it? Here's what hurts them the most. You didn't turn cold. You turned clear. You didn't become cruel. You became selective. You didn't change who you are. You stopped overextending it. That's when they finally understand something critical. Your kindness was never unconditional. It was considered. And once consideration ends, so does access. This is where fear transforms. It's no longer fear of consequences. It's fear of replacement. Because now they see something else happening. Your circle changes. Not dramatically, quietly. Fewer people, better people. You're not chasing connection. You're attracting alignment. And they're watching from the outside. Watching you give the same warmth, the same loyalty, the same energy, just not to them. That's when jealousy creeps in, not because they want you back, but because someone else gets what they lost. Someone else benefits from your presence. Someone else respects what they took for granted. And that comparison is brutal, because it confirms the truth they've been avoiding. You didn't leave because you're difficult. You left because they failed the standard. Now comes the stage where they try to rewrite history. They tell themselves you were never that valuable, that you were boring, that you were too serious, too sensitive, too quiet. But the narrative doesn't hold, because if you weren't valuable, why does your absence feel so loud? Why do they think about you when something goes wrong? Why do they miss the way you handled things? Why do they catch themselves wanting your advice? They don't miss you as a person. They miss the stability you provided, the emotional regulation, the grounding presence, the consistency. And that's when it hits them. You were a stabilizer in their life. And now you're gone. That absence creates chaos. They start noticing how messy things feel without you. How conflicts escalate faster. How misunderstandings linger. How no one steps in the way you used to. They realize you are doing invisible labor, and invisible labor only gets noticed when it stops. This is the part that humbles them, because it forces them to confront their own behavior. They ask themselves questions they avoided before. Why did I think I could treat them that way? Why didn't I listen when they were patient? Why did I push someone who never pushed back? And the answer is uncomfortable, because it leads back to entitlement. They assumed your kindness was guaranteed. They assumed your loyalty was permanent. They assumed you'd always be there. And assumptions destroy relationships faster than betrayal. Here's the truth they finally understand. You didn't remove them to punish them. You removed them to protect yourself. That's the difference between cruelty and self-respect. Cruelty wants suffering. Self-respect wants peace. And you chose peace. That choice altered everything. Because now they don't just lose you. They lose access to who they were when you were around. They lose the version of themselves that felt supported, balanced, understood. And that loss forces them into one of two paths: growth or resentment. Some choose growth. Those people learn. They reflect. They change. They carry the lesson forward. They don't get you back, but they become better for having lost you. Others choose resentment. They blame you. They harden. They repeat the pattern. And those people stay stuck. But here's the part that matters most. None of that is your responsibility. You're not here to save people from themselves. You're here to live with integrity. And integrity requires boundaries. This is what makes your archetype so powerful. You're not loud. You're not aggressive. You don't dominate rooms. You dominate situations with awareness, with control, with restraint. You're strong in a way that doesn't need witnesses. Strong in a way that doesn't need validation. Strong enough to walk away without explanation. That's why people who finally see you clearly never forget you. You become a reference point. People. Every future interaction gets compared to you. Every future boundary gets measured against yours. And even if they never admit it, you raised their standard permanently. That's the quiet legacy of a gentle warrior. Now let's talk about you. Because this story isn't really about them. It's about who you are becoming. You didn't wake up one day and decide to be hard. You became precise. You learned that empathy without boundaries is self-destruction. You learned that being understanding doesn't mean being available to abuse. You learned that peace isn't something you ask for. It's something you enforce. And enforcement doesn't require violence. It requires clarity. That clarity changed the way you move. You no longer over-explain. You no longer justify. You no longer tolerate confusion where respect should exist. Your energy is different now. Not colder, cleaner. You invest where effort is mutual. You give where appreciation exists. You show up where presence is valued. And you withdraw where entitlement appears. That makes some people uncomfortable, because they were used to the old version of you. The version that absorbed. The version that softened situations. The version that stayed. They call this version changed. They say you're distant, detached, different. They're right. You changed? You stop betraying yourself. And that's not a loss. That's evolution. Here's what most people never understand. The most dangerous people aren't angry. They're calm. They don't need to prove strength. They don't threaten. They don't posture. They just decide. And once they decide, access is gone, not temporarily, permanently. That's what makes your presence valuable, and your absence devastating. You are not dramatic enough for chaos, not passive enough for exploitation. You exist in the middle, where power is controlled, where kindness is chosen, where boundaries are non-negotiable. This is why manipulators struggle with you. They can't intimidate you. They can't guilt you. They can't provoke you, because you see tactics for what they are. And once seen, they lose power. You don't fight manipulators. You disengage, and disengagement starves them. That's the final blow. Now let's talk about the future, because this isn't the end of the story. It's the filter. From this point forward, your life becomes quieter, but richer. Smaller circle, deeper connections. You attract people who don't need convincing. People who respect boundaries instinctively. People who don't test kindness. People who recognize value without trying to extract it. And those relationships feel different. Safer, cleaner, mutual, no power games, no emotional debt, no silent resentment, just alignment. This is the reward for choosing yourself. And the people who lost access to you, they carry the lesson. Every time they meet someone kind, they hesitate, they remember you. They remember what happens when kindness is mistaken for weakness. These civilized people, they remember the cost of crossing someone who was choosing restraint. You become the unspoken warning, the quiet standard, the example they didn't learn from until it was too late. That's not revenge. That's consequence. So here's the final truth. You were never weak. You were disciplined. People, you were never naive. You were patient. You were never blind. You were hopeful. And now you're clear. Clear about who deserves access. Clear about what you tolerate. Clear about your worth. You didn't lose anyone. You released what couldn't meet you where you stand, and that's not harsh. That's healthy. Gentle warriors don't announce their strength. They reveal it through absence, through boundaries, through peace. And once someone experiences that version of you, they never forget it. Because they don't just lose a person, they lose the privilege of your gentleness. And that loss is permanent.